What if I told you that fireworks, red lanterns, and one of the world's most joyful festivals all started because of a terrifying monster? This is the story of Nian, the creature that inspired Chinese New Year. But beware, after hearing this legend, you'll never look at Chinese New Year the same way again. How did a terrifying monster inspire one of the most vibrant festivals in the world? Let's dive into the legend of Nian. In the heart of ancient China, there was a small village surrounded by dense forests and misty mountains. For most of the year, life there was peaceful. The villagers cultivated their fields. Children played in the dirt streets, and the sound of temple bells echoed at dusk. But once a year, everything changed. It was as if a dark shadow loomed over the village, bringing with it a heavy silence and a fear that no one could explain. It all began with a rumor, a whisper that spread from house to house. He is coming back. No one needed to say the name. Everyone knew who they were talking about. Nian, a gigantic creature with curved horns like blades, scales that shimmered under the moonlight, and eyes that glowed like burning embers. He came from the mountains, where he lived hidden, and descended upon the village to satisfy his hunger. No one knew exactly what he ate, but everyone was afraid to find out. On the night Nian appeared, the village turned into a ghost town. Doors were locked, windows were boarded up, and families hid in the depths of their homes, praying that the monster would pass by. But it didn't always work. Some mornings, the villagers would find destroyed houses, missing animals, and sometimes even people who were never seen again. The fear was so great that many thought about abandoning the village forever. But where would they go? Nian seemed to be everywhere. Year after year, the cycle repeated itself, until on a cold winter night, something changed. An old sage arrived in the village, bringing with him a promise that no one dared to believe. He knew how to defeat the monster, but were the villagers willing to risk everything to find out if he was right? The old sage arrived in the village on a cold morning, wrapped in a simple cloak and carrying a gnarled wooden staff. His hair was gray, and his long beard swayed in the wind, but what stood out the most were his eyes, deep and filled with a wisdom that seemed to come from centuries. He walked calmly through the deserted streets, as if he had no fear of the monster that haunted everyone. The villagers, curious but wary, watched from a distance, unsure of what to think. When the sage stopped in the central square, a small group of brave villagers approached. Among them was Li, a young farmer who had lost his younger brother to the monster the previous year. "Who are you, old man?" asked Li, with a mix of hope and skepticism. The sage smiled calmly and replied, "I am just a traveler, but I bring with me the knowledge that can free you from this nightmare." The sage's words echoed through the square, and soon a crowd formed around him. He explained that, in his travels, he had studied creatures like Nian and discovered that they were not invincible. "The monster you call Nian has three great fears," he said, raising three wrinkled fingers: noise, bright lights, and the color red. "If you use these weapons against him, Nian will never dare to disturb your village again." The sage then taught the villagers how to prepare rudimentary fireworks, using gunpowder and bamboo. He showed them how to create red lanterns and taught the young ones to play drums with strong, strident rhythms. "On the night Nian appears," he explained, "you must light the lanterns, set off the fireworks, and play the drums without stopping. The noise and lights will confuse him, and the color red will scare him. He will flee and never return." Despite the renewed hope, many still doubted. The monster Nian was a force of nature, something that seemed beyond human control. But with the sage guiding them, the villagers began their preparations. They worked day and night, decorating the village with red lanterns and rehearsing the drum beats. With each passing day, the tension grew. Nian could appear at any moment, and no one knew if the plan would really work. On the eve of the expected attack, the sage gathered everyone in the central square. "Remember," he said, "fear is Nian's greatest weapon. If you face him with courage and unity, he will have no power over you with those words." He disappeared into the night, leaving behind a village full of hope but also doubt. What would happen when the monster finally appeared? Night fell over the village like a heavy cloak. The red lanterns swayed gently in the wind, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the houses. The villagers were gathered in the central square, holding drums, fireworks, and torches. The air was charged with tension, and the silence was almost palpable. Everyone knew that at any moment, the monster Nian could appear. Li stood in the center of the square, holding a drum with firm hands. He looked around, seeing the anxious faces of his friends and neighbors. Remember what the sage said? He murmured, more to himself than to the others. Noise, lights, and red. That's how we will defeat him. But deep down, he also felt a chill down his spine. What if the plan didn't work? What if Nian was stronger than they imagined? Suddenly, a distant sound echoed from the mountains. It was a low, guttural growl, like that of a hungry animal. Everyone looked at each other, knowing that the moment had come. "He's coming," whispered a woman, clutching her torch tightly. Li raised his hand, signaling for everyone to get ready. "Wait for my signal," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The growl grew louder, closer. Soon, they could hear the sound of heavy footsteps, as if something enormous was approaching. Then he appeared. Nian emerged from the shadows, larger and more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. His eyes glowed like burning coals, and his curved horns reflected the light of the lanterns. He stopped at the entrance to the village, sniffing the air like a predator about to attack. It was then that Li shouted, "Now!" The drums began to sound, beaten with strength and rhythm. The fireworks were lit, exploding in the sky with bright lights and thunderous noises. The red lanterns swayed frantically, creating a dance of colors and shadows. The village, once silent, was now full of life and noise. Nian stopped, confused. He had never faced anything like this. His eyes widened and he took a step back, roaring in frustration. But the villagers didn't stop. They continued beating the drums, setting off more fireworks and waving the lanterns. "Go away!" shouted Li with all his might. "You are not welcome here." The monster seemed to hesitate, looking around as if surrounded. Then, with a final roar, he turned and ran toward the mountains, disappearing into the darkness. The villagers continued their celebration for a few minutes until they finally realized Nian had fled. The village was saved. A wave of relief and joy swept through everyone. People hugged, laughed, and cried, unable to believe what they had accomplished. Li looked up at the sky, where the last fireworks still sparkled, and smiled. "We did it," he murmured, feeling an immense weight lifted from his shoulders. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered. Had Nian really gone away forever? Or would he return, stronger and more furious than ever? The news of the monster Nian's escape spread through the village like wildfire. People came out of their houses, still holding drums and lanterns, and gathered in the central square. The relief was visible on every face, and contagious joy filled the air. Children ran through the streets, laughing and shouting, while adults hugged, incredulous at what they had achieved. Li was surrounded by a crowd of grateful villagers. "You saved us," some said, shaking his hand or patting his back. He smiled but remained humble. "It wasn't me," he replied. "It was the sage who showed us the way, and it was the courage of everyone that made the difference." The celebration continued all night long. The villagers lit bonfires, shared food, and danced to the sound of the drums. For the first time in years, the village was full of life and hope. The red lanterns, which had once been a symbol of fear, now shone as a sign of victory and unity. In the midst of the festivities, Li stepped away from the crowd and looked toward the distant mountains. He still remembered Nian's roar and the look of fear on the monster's face. Had he really gone away forever? Or was he out there, in the shadows, planning his return? Li shook his head, trying to push those thoughts away. Today was a day of celebration, not worry. as the sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the villagers finally began to disperse. The children, exhausted but happy, were taken home by their parents. The adults, still smiling, began to clean the square and put out the bonfires. But before everyone left, Li climbed onto a bench and called for their attention. Today, we prove that when we stand together, we can face any challenge, he said, his voice echoing through the square. Nian may have frightened us for years, but today he learned that we are no longer victims. Let us remember this night as the moment our village was reborn. The villagers applauded and cheered with joy, promising never to forget what they had achieved. And as the sun illuminated the village, everyone felt that a new era had begun. Fear had been replaced by hope, and darkness by light. But in the distant mountains, an almost imperceptible sound echoed. It was faint, like a whisper, but enough to remind everyone that, although Nian had fled, he was still out there. And perhaps one day he would return. Li, now a respected leader in the village, always led the celebrations. He saw the festival not only as a reminder of the victory over Nian, but also as a way to honor the sage who had helped them. He showed us that fear can be overcome, Li would tell the younger ones, and that, together, we are stronger than any monster. Over time, the story of the monster Nian and the villagers' courage spread to other villages and cities. People began to adopt the same traditions, decorating their homes with red lanterns, setting off fireworks, and celebrating with dances and music. The festival became a symbol of renewal, a time to leave the past behind and embrace the future with hope and optimism. But even as the years passed, the legend of Nian was never forgotten. Children heard the story from their parents and grandparents, and the elders recounted how, on that fateful night, the village had faced fear and emerged victorious. The story became part of the people's identity, a reminder that, even in the darkest hours, light can always prevail. And so, what began as a night of terror turned into one of the most joyful and colorful celebrations in the world. The Chinese New Year, with its red lanterns, fireworks, and dragon dances, carries with it the legacy of a village that faced fear and created a tradition that endures to this day. Today, thousands of years after that night, when the village faced the monster Nian, the legend still lives. It is told in books, portrayed in plays, and celebrated in festivals around the world. The Chinese New Year, with its vibrant colors, joyful sounds, and rich traditions, is a testament to the power of a story that began with fear and ended in hope. But the legacy of the Nian monster goes beyond the celebrations. It reminds us that fear, no matter how terrifying it may seem, can be faced. The story of the village teaches us that when we come together and use our creativity and courage, we can overcome even the darkest challenges. Nian, who was once a symbol of terror, is now a reminder that light can always defeat darkness. For families who gather during the Chinese New Year, the legend of Nian is more than just a story. It is a lesson passed down from generation to generation. Parents tell their children how the village used noise, lights, and the color red to scare away the monster, and how that victory gave rise to the traditions they celebrate today. It is a way to teach children that, even in the most difficult moments, there is always a way out. And so, the monster Nian, who once terrified a small village, became part of something much greater. He is a symbol of resilience, unity, and hope. His story inspires us to face our own fears, whether big or small, and to believe that together, we can create a brighter future. As the red lanterns sway in the wind and the fireworks light up the sky, the legend of Nian continues to live on. It reminds us that even on the darkest nights, there is always a light to guide us. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that fear can be transformed into courage and darkness into light. So, did you enjoy learning about the incredible legend of the monster Nian and how it gave rise to the Chinese New Year? If you liked this video, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next stories. Let us know in the comments which part of the legend impressed you the most, or if you already knew this story. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. A big hug and a Happy Chinese New Year to everyone.